The art of creating a soundtrack for a movie or TV series is often a very unique endeavor, since the music have to be memorable enough to elicit an emotional response from the audience, yet it can't be too intrusive and detract the audience from what is happening on the screen. So case in point, Hans Zimmer film score for Interstellar is at times ethereal and at times frenetic. But each piece of music perfectly complements the scene created by Christopher Nolan. On the other hand, Ludwig Göransson's score for Oppenheimer is almost overbearing all the time and suggests a constant tension where there really isn't one. So if music is the soundtrack of life, then a good film or TV soundtrack would probably elevate a movie or TV series, regardless of its actual quality. So with this in mind, this is a video series that explores some of the great soundtracks of the past and the feelings they evoke long after the shows have run. And the first one we explore would be David Lynch and Mark Frost's strange and wonderful track to the 90s, the weird, surreal and at times terrifying Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks premiered on ABC in April 1990. The central premise of the show revolved around the murder of high school senior Laura Palmer, played by Cheryl Lee. FBI Special Agent Dale Cooper, played with wonderful eccentricity by Carl McCullum, was tasked to investigate the murder. Agent Cooper was the type of man who would name his tape recorder Diane, or at least until season 3 shattered that notion, while making use of dreams and aura to solve mysteries. So along the way, Agent Cooper would meet up with a group of mostly surreal supporting characters who would either aid him in his investigation or pose a threat to him. Okay? So Ray Wise put in an excellent performance as Laura Palmer's grief-stricken father, Leland, while also portraying a malevolent side as the host of the demonic entity Bob. Cheryl Lee also amicably played a second role as Laura's cousin, Maddie Ferguson. David Lynch himself had a small part as the bureau chief Gordon Cole. So even a pre-X-File fame David Duchovny put in an admirable performance as the trans DEA agent, Denise, a reality on TV back in the 90s. So other prominent stars who were in Twin Peaks include the likes of Lara Flynn Boyle, Joan Cheng and Billy Zane. Having rewatched the first 2 seasons in recent time, it hit me that the central narrative of Twin Peaks was not particularly strong, a fact that somehow escaped my attention the first time I watched it in the 90s. In fact, you can almost describe season 2 as anticlimactic, as the mystery of Laura Palmer's murders was resolved somewhere in the middle of the season. And the series kind of meandered on until its abrupt conclusion at the end of the season. However, what you can't fault is the atmosphere that David Lynch and Mark Frost had brilliantly constructed throughout its run. At times affable and at times bizarre, the show seems to paint an idyllic picture of a small town life where Agent Cooper's questionable investigation techniques were somehow accepted without so much a protest. The show also toyed with soap opera conventions such as hidden love affairs and troubling family secrets, only to tear down with a sudden descent into the eerie and the macabre. Before you know it, you will find yourself in the Black Lodge watching a dancing dwarf talk in cryptic codes. This is of course a familiar territory for David Lynch, who is incredibly adept at creating strange, compelling narratives, as evidenced by his prior works such as Blue Velvet and Eraserhead. I think it would be fair to say that beyond the visuals, the atmosphere of Twin Peaks also owed a great deal to the iconic soundtrack by Angelo Badalamenti and Julie Cruz. First of all, rest in peace to David Lynch, Angelo Badalamenti and Julie Cruz, who all passed away in recent years. You know you are getting old when the artists you enjoy are passing on, but that is just life for you. I remember first hearing the Twin Peaks soundtrack when I first saw the show on late night TV. Honestly, at the point in time, I was unfamiliar with any of David Lynch movies. However, the Twin Peaks theme drew me in with its very first notes. It was ethereal and beautifully enchanting, with a mysterious undertone to it. There was frankly nothing quite like it on TV, which was a testament to Angelo Badalamenti's craft. Another iconic track, Laura Palmer's theme, was both grievous and slightly sinister, which perfectly set up Laura Palmer's horrifying fate in the show. Meanwhile, Dance of the Dream Man is a playful jazzy theme that highlights the surrealism and eccentricity of some of the show's ideas. Prior to Twin Peaks, Badalamenti had collaborated with David Lynch on the Blue Velvet soundtrack, and had also done some film scoring work on movies such as A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. But I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that he was most well known for his work on the original runs of Twin Peaks. In fact, one of the most memorable themes on the more recent Twin Peaks The Return would be Badalamenti's new compositions of Heartbreaking, which was shown in episode 11 of the season. For many soundtracks, having songs with vocals along with the usual film score typically yield very mixed results. However, in the case of Twin Peaks, Julee Cruz's 3 contributed tracks mesh perfectly against the backdrop of Badalamenti's scores. Julee Cruz's 3 tracks were The Nightingale, Into the Night, and Falling, which could also be found in her debut album, Floating Into the Night. These songs are rightfully recognized as dream pop classics. So for me, along with Mazzy Star and Galaxy 500, Julee Cruz was my introduction into the blissful world of dream pop, and her debut album was released on the Warner Bros. Labels. Would not be out of place on, say, 4AD at the time. It was Badalamenti who first introduced Julee Cruz to David Lynch during the scoring process of Blue Velvet, and the results of that meeting was the masterful collaboration as heard on Twin Peaks. Alternative rock was huge in the 90s. As you can imagine, many movie and TV soundtracks of the day capitalized on the popularity of alternative rock by full-loading the album with would-be alternative hits of the day. Some common examples would include Baz Luhrmann's modern day version of Romeo's and Juliet, Amy Heckering's Clueless, and Alanis Moy's Empire Records. In many of these circumstances, there really wasn't much of a context for many of the songs used beyond the fact that the songs were popular flavor of the day. In that sense, the soundtrack of Twin Peaks was a very unique proposition, as it featured prominent dream pop songs that had very strong ties to the underlying mystique of the show, while using an atmospheric jazz, classical and ambient film score to evoke the images and narratives of the show. I can honestly say that till this day, not many movies or TV shows succeed creatively in the same manner as the original Twin Peaks did. Even Twin Peaks The Return, with its liberal use of bands in the Roadhouse scenes, seem to pale in comparison. This is why the Twin Peaks soundtrack is one of the classics that you certainly need to check out. And unlike many soundtracks with expired licenses, you can still find the Twin Peaks soundtrack on major streaming platforms in its entirety. So do yourself a favor and spend an hour listening to the soundtrack, and maybe even watch all 3 seasons of the show if you can find it on your local streaming platforms. There are certainly worse ways to spend your time, and in any case, right, thanks for listening, and let me know in the comments if there are any other soundtracks that you find to be classics as well.